Welcome to Episode 1. And before we start, I want you to understand something about the stories we're going to be walking into. In the world of intelligence, almost nothing ever resolves neatly. Nothing ends with a bow. The most important events don't announce themselves. They ripple, they echo, they leave outlines, shadows, fingerprints on other people's careers, on unexpected scandals, on systems that keep resurfacing decades later, in places they were never supposed to reach. This is one of those stories. It starts with a piece of software no one outside a tiny circle ever cared about, and ends in the circles everyone knows, but no one understands. So let's start where the ghost first appeared. PROMIS was born inside a small company called Inslaw back in the 70s and 80s, and from the moment it came online, people inside the intelligence world recognized what it really was: a way to track human beings across databases, jurisdictions, and countries with the kind of seamless precision that governments dream about. A contract dispute with the Justice Department blew up into years of investigations, hearings, reports, counter-reports, and nothing ever landed cleanly. And when stories don't land cleanly, they don't die. They metastasize. And that's why PROMIS has lived for decades as a ghost in the intelligence machine. Something that definitely existed, definitely spread, and maybe wasn't spread by the people who built it. The allegations start in the late 80s, and they're always the same shape no matter who tells them: that PROMIS was modified with a hidden door, that you could sell it to foreign intelligence services while still keeping access to whatever they were running through it, and that pieces of this thing quietly walked out of Inslaw's hands and into the shadows. Congressional summaries couldn't seal the story shut. Investigators couldn't agree, and the software itself kept popping up in places no one expected. The only thing everyone agrees on is that PROMIS went global. The fight is about who carried it across the border. And this is where Robert Maxwell shows up. Maxwell was already the kind of man who drifted effortlessly between media, money, and intelligence services, a publisher and fixer with international reach and a remarkable tendency to be in the room when sensitive technology changed hands. Reporters, intelligence veterans, and investigators have, for decades, described him as a key broker who helped sell modified PROMIS to governments worldwide, often through Israeli channels. Whether every detail is provable or not, the pattern fits the man. Maxwell traded in information and influence like other people trade in commodities. PROMIS was exactly his kind of product. After Maxwell died, his children moved into that same ecosystem in ways that raised entirely new questions. Isabel Maxwell spent the 90s and early 2000s embedded in Israeli tech, building companies around search engines, communications infrastructure, and early internet tools. She never appears in any official document connecting her to PROMIS, but her career sits in the same gravitational field: information flow, software, data. The very space where PROMIS would evolve if it didn't disappear. And then there's Ghislaine Maxwell, who became the operational partner of Jeffrey Epstein, the man whose social circle blended billionaires, academics, financiers, intelligence-adjacent handlers, and state power like a cocktail. Epstein's world was built on access, on compromat, on data, on knowing who went where, with whom, and why. In other words, on the same logic that made PROMIS terrifying and valuable in the first place. So when researchers try to connect these nodes, they're not doing courtroom logic. They're mapping patterns. PROMIS was the kind of tool intelligence agencies hunger for. Robert Maxwell is repeatedly positioned as the man who moved it. Isabel worked in the precise tech ecosystem where PROMIS-style systems would resurface or mutate. Ghislaine partnered with Epstein, who lived inside an information-gathering universe that smells a lot like the downstream version of what PROMIS promised. Intelligence work often moves through families: Bush, Nehru Gandhi, Kim Dynasty, Pahlavi, Saudis, and the Maxwells were already halfway there. The speculative part isn't wild, it's structural. PROMIS's alleged backdoor capabilities line up almost too neatly with Epstein's information-leveraging networks. Epstein had deep, strange access to intelligence-linked circles, and the Maxwell daughters ended up in positions that mirrored their father's sphere in updated forms, one in tech, one in influence. When you step back, the picture that emerges isn't a conspiracy board full of red string. It's a family standing in the same river of intelligence, information, and power for 40 years. PROMIS in the 70s, Maxwell in the 80s, Isabel in the 90s, Epstein and Ghislaine through the 2000s and 2010s. Every decade, the same surnames orbit the same kinds of tools. Here's the blunt truth. PROMIS was real, powerful, and interesting enough to draw intelligence attention. The allegations of its modification never went away. Robert Maxwell's name appears again and again in those stories. Isabel built her life inside the Israeli tech world. Ghislaine built hers beside Epstein. Epstein built his entire operation on information and leverage.